English translation 542nd contact Saturday, the 7th of July 2012, 14:30 hours.
It is good that we did not have much to correct today, because that way we have enough time to clarify some issues, if you do not lack the necessary time.
If there are not too many questions, dear friend,
A lot is already happening.
then let us begin right away.
Last night, as already repeatedly before, I had another phone call and was asked for the umpteenth time why we do not make ebooks. Also, we have once talked about this at a General Assembly, in which case, I also spoke against such in accordance with what Zafanat Paniach, you, Quetzal, and your committee had to say about it, which unfortunately was discussed only in a private conversation and therefore was not written down in a contact report. Therefore, I would like to ask you once to say something officially about it from your own side, and indeed even what you have said to me about the connection between book and reader.
What I have explained to you concerning electronic books refers to both Zafanat Panique's, Quetzal's, and also from our committee and my own experiences. Electronic texts, which also exist with us Pleyaran, of course in much more sophisticated forms, serve only for the dissemination of information and communication. Contrary to this, we have bookworks, however, that do not consist of paper and cardboard covers, but of uncorruptible artificial materials, which are not inscribed in a form of printing process, but in a form that has the resemblance of a photographic technique. These artificial materials for bookworks are, as said, uncorruptible, and the bookworks find great popularity among our populations and therefore frequent use. In particular, since we are permitted to have your papers and books, your educational works, these have actually found dissemination in great measure. Electronic bookworks are not made out of it, except in the mode that they, with teachings through the spirit guides, are reproduced in appropriate mode on large surfaces suitable for reading for all listeners, and then the listener can be explained. Otherwise, however, no electronic books and literary works are produced and therefore not used, because the whole of an electronic book form has a cold and impersonal effect on the reader. Consequently, no valueful connection to the book contents, and therefore also no eventual participation with the contents can be established. The whole effect of the electronic contents on the reader is thus impersonal and unactive. Consequently, deep-reaching impulsations fail to appear. The electronic book or journal contents act as banal phrases, stiffnesses, without warmth and as restrictions. Malfunctions, unfamiliar characteristics, quirks, and even as absurdities, etc., because no internal connection can result from it, and everything is active like a cold foreign body. On the contrary, where there is a right bookwork which can be held in the hands, then the reading human being, as the owner, enters into an ownership connection with it. In this case, however, the whole thing goes deeper and creates, through the book or magazine content in these human beings reading the content, a deep-reaching warmth and connection as well as a participation with the material that he or she reads. Through the form and mode of this inner personal connection, the interest is also awakened, through which arises both a thinking for oneself and participation, as well as also an experiencing, through which the thoughts and feelings are stimulated and therefore a questioning and learning also ensues, which can only be achieved with difficulty or not at all with electronic books and writings. This is simply so because electronic books and writings display only cold information that does not speak to personal inner impulsations and cannot create any deep connection to intellect and rationality as well as to the inner warmth. If a book is used, then connected with this and its contents is a personal relationship. Thus, it can be taken again and again into the hands, be reread or studied, in which case, therefore, also thoughts and feelings become connected. However, electronic devices, books and writings as well as their contents remain, cold, impersonal, relationshipless, and connectionless, because the devices are only a piece of lifeless material for the human beings, and the content is extinguished as soon as the device is turned off. On the contrary, a book affects the human being as something, with its contents, that he or she is also then still dealing with. On the one hand, when it is put away then, it is again within reach at any time. And on the other hand, the content through renewed reading or thinking becomes internalized again and understood. Moreover, in no case does an electronic device leave such a variety of lasting impressions. How this is imparted in a book that can be held in the hands and is again accessible at any time when it is put away, and with which the human being enters a mental feeling-based relationship and connection.
Thanks. That one-time open explanation can really lead to the understanding that electronic books are really unsuitable for learning because they serve only purely for information and maybe for entertainment, but otherwise cannot be regarded as valuable with regards to learning. When I think about it, then the whole thing appears to me how the news and other information are brought through newspapers, which may be absorbed by the readers and then become quickly forgotten again because the entire information is only superficial, not personally related and without personal relationship and connection. That is the crucial point.
Which is to be confirmed.
Next question. You play and also do sports and competitions, which, as you once said, are largely in accordance with the earthly Olympic Games, but as you also do other sports. Do you also practice extreme sports that are life-threatening or simply primitive?
I explained to you earlier that primitive extreme sports and competitions that are life-threatening are not common and not given in our country, because we Plejaren value physical integrity and the protection of life very highly, as you know. A human being who practices extreme sports or competitions in any form that endangers the body or life is just as reckless and completely irresponsible towards his own body and life as he is towards the body, life, and mental state of fellow human beings if they are affected by them in any way. And if extreme sports and competitive human beings are physically harmed or lose their lives in the process, as is the case with the Earth humans, then it is absolutely their own fault, and any indulgence is also inappropriate for them. Anyone who endangers life and limb in his own or another's way and consciously accepts bodily harm or even death does not need compassion, but only scolding and rebuke. If a human being does not respect the health and integrity of his own body, or that of a fellow human being, and plays with his own life, or that of another in such a way that physical injury or death can occur, he is unworthy of life. And this is also true when the courts, etc., impose torture or the death penalty on human beings as punishment. Because such action and deed is in any case wrong and in accordance with the creational natural laws and recommendations not of the right, but a malicious and vengeful form of a legally ordered order to kill, which is then carried out by an executioner who is thereby guilty of direct murder, like any other murdering human being.
Those are good words, dear friend, and they are entirely in my mind. Boxing and the like and football, there are often serious injuries. There is also motor vehicle sport of all kinds, as well as bungee jumping, extreme parachute jumping from rock faces and skyscrapers, etc., and other similar activities, as well as extreme climbing and dangerous mountaineering, etc., where there are very often deaths, as well as serious injuries that result in a lifelong disability or crippling, respectively, as the saying goes, and for which the insurance companies, health insurance companies, and the state then have to pay. In addition, many so-called sports are nothing more than commercial business practices in which fraud is committed and enormous sums of bribes and kickbacks are paid, as has recently become publicized, particularly in connection with world football, but which is also the case with other so-called sports. Doping with medicines, anabolic steroids, and various special drugs is also part of the daily routine, because everything is about victory, image, and horrendous prizes. There are also often serious injuries and deaths at various introduction ceremonies, respectively initiation rites, etc.
All of this unfortunately corresponds to reality, which means that there can no longer be any talk of fair sport. Such doing and acting, as you called it, is absolutely reprehensible and should never be allowed to appear, also not with regard to rituals that are harmful to the body and possibly deadly. Boxing and other activities in a similar and in any other primitive context, as well as other extreme sports and competitions, etc., as you called them, which directly endanger the body and life, do not exist with us, because such action and doing are beneath every human dignity. And even among primitive peoples, such things do not appear in the form in which they are deliberately practiced by so-called civilized human beings. This, if one disregards physically dangerous and life-threatening tests of courage such as bungee jumping and rival and status weapon fights as well as rituals, etc., which are considered by certain primitive natives as heroic and manly battles and rank fights, etc., but such primitive things bear witness to the primitiveness of the natives, who are underdeveloped in their consciousness. But if these primitivities are taken over, practiced and imitated by so-called civilized human beings, then those who imitate these things fall far below the level of action and intelligence of the primitive indigenous peoples. Primitivities can only be exercised by primitive species that have not yet progressed far enough in their evolution of consciousness to grasp the inestimable value of physical health and life. So they are also unable to handle them responsibly. And as for football, as it is practiced on Earth by adult Earth humans, we Plejaren cannot accept this kind of children's game as a primitive adult sport and as an adult game, nor can we accept other similarly primitive so-called sports practiced by adult Earth humans. I can also say that we have never seen any primitive people, not even their children, fall into this kind of activity. It is understandable that children in the civilized world play football because they know and possess the appropriate balls. But that the human beings who believe they are grown-ups show such childish and even immature behavior is shameful. We Plejaren would be ashamed to act in this respect, as well as in relation to other primitivities done by Earth humans who believe themselves to be adults. Every adult Plejaren human beings would sink into their own shame and disgrace, behaving like primitive natives and running after a ball as a grown-up in order to push it with their feet through the air and then into a certain target. Our games, sports and competitions for adults correspond to forms which are actually intended for the human beings who are grown up and which are also not dangerous to the body or life. Nor do they pollute the atmosphere, as is the case, for example, with explosion engines in relation to motorsports. We also know of no fanaticism in this respect, which is peculiar to many Earth humans, as well as no forms of hooliganism. We Plejaren keep our mental and emotional impulses under control in this respect, as elsewhere, so that there can also be no excesses and degenerations, etc. in any things, events and situations, etc.
Aha, you have never said all that so clearly before. It is a pity that the human beings on Earth who are affected by your words cannot find the way to correct behavior in their delusion, because they think they are smarter and greater than they really are. And as for your mental and emotional control, this is a good move for you, and one that would also be beneficial to the human beings of Earth. When I think of all the degenerations that occur to them at every appropriate and inappropriate occasion through wrong thoughts and feelings, it is more than regrettable. Such degenerative manifestations also occur in grief, when it is not mastered through incomprehension and irrationality, which ultimately destroys the psyche or physical health or even ends life by suicide, when the grief cannot be mastered because no control over the world of thoughts and feelings is exercised. The control over thoughts and feelings also determines the impulses of love and hate, of revenge and retribution, as well as greed, compassion, and all other vital factors.
The learning of the control of thoughts and feelings is indeed a factor of the greatest importance for Earth humans, for if such control is not given, then nothing can really take place in such a way that it takes place within the framework of the laws and recommendations of the creative nature and brings about benefits, advantages and everything in a positive form. Wars, death penalty, discord, greed for power, and all other inhuman degenerations are also caused by a lack of control of thoughts and feelings.
But a control of thoughts and feelings requires a healthy ratio, a sound mind, a sound reason, and a grasping logic, as well as the perception and understanding of the effective reality and its truth.
That is undeniable.
Unfortunately, not for the stupid know-it-alls and critics who always want to know and understand everything better. The adversaries are also among them, who, for primitive reasons, negate everything that is truth and are envious of those who call the effective truth, or do great things that are impossible for themselves because they are incapable of doing so, or too stupid to recognize reality and its truth, or to do something valuable themselves. And unfortunately, there are many of the human beings of this kind on Earth. Basically, they are just loud-mouthed, hypocritical, and too stupid to recognize their own stupidity and stupidness. Their intelligence is just enough to stir up trouble and insult any fellow human being, to push them into the mud, to slander, to exploit and lie to them, etc.
Which you can speak of from experience and experience. When I consider all that has been done to you in these relationships by malicious, stupid, and primitive adversaries for decades, even from your own family, which is extremely regrettable.
But unfortunately not to change, because all my adversaries, also those in my own family, are not willing to deal with reality and its truth. On the contrary, they run riot in hatred and envy and in monstrous slander, just as your daughter Simyase, you and Quetzal and Askit predicted me would.
Yes, unfortunately everything really happened like that. But it was also not possible otherwise because what we explained to you was based on foresight. But we had not figured it all out, so neither you nor we knew that it was going to get much worse, as it finally did. But I do not think it would have made any difference to you if you had known what was really going to happen, because you would have stood by your mission and taken it on board anyway.
I have thought about that a lot, and I have come to the conclusion that even if I had known everything down to the last detail, I would not have been prevented from doing my duty. But now my next question, which I have to put forward, it concerns you, the Plejaren, and your federates. You, Plejaren, are also active in your federation for the spreading of the teaching of truth. Teaching of spirit, teaching of life. And I would like to ask how far you are trying to go in this respect and whether your federation is also involved.
Our Plejaren spiritual leaders and other sages are active in teaching the lessons of our Plejaren Federation to the peoples, but only as far as is desired because we too are subject to the missionary condition of not missionizing. And what we do with regard to the peoples of our Federation, their spiritual leaders and other sages also do in the same way with regard to foreign peoples of the world, if they have them under their care or if new contacts are established with them. There are also human beings who call themselves proclaimers and prophets of their own accord, namely when they have knowledge of the doctrine or knowledge of future events, which is why there is also talk of prophesying and prophethood, because future things are prophesied or spoken as a warning, respectively, as a possibility for the future. In this way, the teaching spreads into all the vastness of the universe, but there must always be a precondition that the teaching is desired, which is not always the case because, as a rule, even among the peoples of other worlds, traditional beliefs are prescribed, from which the believers can only free themselves with difficulty. The infamous and deceitful as well as infiltrating missionary work, by which the human beings are misled and persuaded to believe, as it is done by the earthly religions and sects, is absolutely forbidden. If the human beings want to turn to teaching, this must be done in their own interest, as well as out of their own decision and of their own free will, and without infiltrating influence. In small groups, etc., there is always an interest in the teaching of Nocodemion, and therefore it can and may be taught in this respect. after which larger groups of other interested people are formed when they recognize the changes for the better and good of those who begin to live and act according to the teaching. This is how the teaching spreads. But also in this respect, any kind of missionary work is excluded.
Thanks, Ptah. That's roughly how Bernadette and I also imagined it. But now I have a question again, which relates to an apparent contradiction, because in the matter of the Tunguska catastrophe, those private conversations between you and I are not included in the official contact reports. When we talked about it on various occasions, you also explained that the three great planetary peoples, including the space travelers who exploded their spaceship over the Tunguska area, had left their old home and found 3 new planets far away. These were uninhabited worlds, but they were suitable for them and they could use them as new homeworlds for themselves. However, you have kept quiet about the details of how the whole thing works, which is why it is now necessary to go into them in more detail. Because somebody has stumbled upon the fact that the 365th Contact Report in Volume 9 contains different information than the 428th Contact Report in Volume 10. At the 476th Contact Report, you then gave a further explanation. For me, the matter is actually clear, but not yet for a reader, probably also because she has not yet read the 476th report. Here I have copied out 4 parts of the report, also one from Ascot.
Ascot's explanations.
Written down on the 1st of September 1964 in Mahrauli, India. Literal reproductions by Ascot, with the help of her apparatuses, which enable these literal reproductions from her subconscious. The following statement was made by Ascot on the 3rd of February 1953, while we were in her ship in the Jordanian desert mountains.
So these insane facts were spread to the 3 distant worlds and made known to the races that had lived for thousands of years in peace and love and in complete harmony with all life forms and with each other. The madness of the earthly religions was taken up by scientists, and new expeditions were sent to Earth to investigate all the necessary religious facts in years of work. After the return of these expeditions, it was decided, after detailed investigations, to teach all peoples according to the earthly Christian religion in all matters. This was a fatal mistake, because within only 11 years, the peaceful humanity of the one faraway world, which until then had only lived according to the laws of creation, was transformed into the faithfully Christian image of Earth humans. At first there was fighting and discord in the innermost circles, but then everything spread very quickly and public unrest broke out. Soon the life forms were murdering each other, until everything degenerated into a vicious worldwide war. In the end there were attacks on the other 2 worlds, one of which was destroyed. Finally, other races of space travelers became aware of this, intervened, and violently ended the deadly conflict, which was already slowly spreading to the whole solar system. The earthly religions brought by the expeditions in Christianity, which had triggered the destruction, were strictly forbidden to any life form. All existing religious material was destroyed, and the old form of life became again the supreme law. Any advance and any further visit to Earth was forbidden, and there was even a provision that if a ship should unexpectedly stray to Earth and find no possibility of progress, the entire crew together with the ship would be totally eliminated. This also actually happened about 1,000 years after this regulation was issued, when a large spaceship still in earthly space was no longer able to free itself from Earth, where it had been hidden for several months with severe technical damage in the country you call Russia. The ship was only able to climb a few hundred meters and then sank again. According to the regulation that no spaceships, etc., were allowed to approach Earth anymore, any assistance was also impossible. On the other hand, it was forbidden for other races from space to bring help to the damaged ship, because an earthly epidemic had broken out among the crew, which was very dangerous for these life forms. Knowing that no help was waiting for them, they constructed a huge bomb out of life's building blocks, which they called an atom, forced the ship as far up into the sky as possible, and then simply let it crash. Like a giant comet, it crashed down to Earth, and before it hit the Earth, the atomic bomb was detonated at a height of a few hundred meters. A huge explosion tore the ship and crew apart, turning everything into dust and destroying the landscape. All that remained of it all was a huge crater, erroneously called a meteor crater by your scientists. More than 4,300 life forms of extraterrestrial origin were destroyed in this gigantic destruction, which can only be attributed to the earthly cult of Christ, because the real reason for this destruction was the madness of this earthly religion.
365th Contact Report, the 28th of January, 2005.
The articles are very interesting, but they do not correspond to the reality of the events of the time. It is true, as you know, that the event was caused by a space-flying apparatus of Earth foreigners' intelligences. Exactly according to Askett's description, as you read it to me with the 86th to the 95th sentence of Askett's explanations. The crew of the large space-flying apparatus, which was destroyed over the Tunguska region on the 30th of June, 1908, came from the Setkatis galaxy, a large spiral galaxy also known to terrestrial astronomers as M101, some 17 million light-years away. The home of the space travelers was a planet a little more than the size of Earth and is called Catullus. It is a satellite of the solar system Blyra, which includes 2 suns and 18 planets, but only 3 of them carry human life. The galaxy can be observed from Earth from above, so to speak, but the Blyra solar system is invisible from Earth because it is beyond observation. The crew of the space-flying apparatus belonged to the Helas people, which is why we call them Gilasser. The Gilasser people were already very advanced in space technology at that time, and were also able to build huge space-flying apparatus using small planetoids. In these, they created large cavities, in which they placed equipment for propulsion, for powerful onboard weapons, for external protective screens and electron collectors, as well as energy storage systems, living quarters, work premises, food production facilities, and life support systems, etc. In other words, everything that was necessary. 428th Contact Report, the 10th of July, 2006.
It is unstoppable. The thoughts just start running. But before we turn to the correction work in Hans Georg's book, I would like to ask you a few questions about the things you mentioned at the 424th official contact conversation on the 17th of June, namely about alien invasions of terrestrial airspace. There was the Tunguska catastrophe, where those space travelers suffered an accident and blew up their big ship because it could not be repaired. Is that also included in your investigations? You did not say anything about that, although it would be interesting to know how things stand in this respect.
The large spaceship that suffered an accident and was destroyed, which resulted in the so-called Tunguska event, belonged to a people who live in a distant galaxy of your space-time continuum. Christianity, however, which was brought to their homeworlds by some of their space travelers and spread rapidly, led to severe religious battles. When order was finally restored, the space travelers were forbidden to enter earthly space again. About 1,000 years after this decree, due to faulty coordinates, a large spaceship of this people strayed into the SOL system and stranded on Earth due to a serious accident that was still occurring, from which it could no longer move away. The spaceship was hidden in the Tunguska area for several months with heavy technical damages. Far away from the hiding place, a large number of the space travelers mingled unrecognized among the Earth humans and became sexually involved with them. which resulted in the fact that many of them got syphilis and also infected many others when returning to their large spaceship. This had very bad consequences for the astronauts, because very quickly dangerous mutations of the disease developed due to their otherness, which just as quickly spread to an epidemic, which cost many lives. They could not expect help from the home world because according to the old regulation, it was forbidden to approach the Earth. In addition, other extraterrestrials stationed on Earth, namely us and our Federation, were forbidden by the government of the space travelers' homeworld to provide any help, so we had to follow our directives. So the Earth foreigners had no choice but to self-destruct as their destiny demanded. So they built an atomic bomb, took the space-flying apparatus to a possible height in the atmosphere, and then crashed it, only to detonate the bomb. The massive explosion completely tore the space-flying apparatus apart and shredded it to pieces. The enormous explosion turning virtually the whole ship and the entire crew of 4,387 human beings into dust and ashes. From our side, everything was observed and recorded. Therefore, we of course also passed on our information to the homeworld of the stranded space travelers, but we were not allowed to intervene in the events. So we had to let things run their course. But we were confident that we could teach the government and the people of the space travelers that they were no longer in danger from the religions of the Earth humans if they would no longer be allowed to interfere with them. In the course of time, our project succeeded, which also resulted in all three peoples' respectively races, namely, their three joining our Federation. They come from an area of a large galaxy cluster, which is about 400 million light-years away from Earth. The three peoples, that is to say races, have three different homeworlds. But they are closely connected to each other and call themselves Bardan as a people unit, just as they also call their homeworlds Bardan 1, 2, and 3 and have a common government.
476th Contact Report, the 3rd of February, 2009.
You have not misunderstood anything, just as I have not confused anything. But it is still my mistake, because I did not mention that all three peoples of Gillis emigrated from their original home planet Cthulhus in the system Bleira, 17 million light-years away from Earth, and settled 400 million light-years away in the Spiral Galaxy in the Coma Cluster of Galaxies M101. Their three new home planets they call Bardan and consequently themselves now also Bardan.
Aha, and why did they emigrate?
A worldwide epidemic killed more than 4/5 of all Gilliner within 3 decades, so the healthy survivors fled and sought new homeworlds, which they found with our help. In order to end the epidemic, which also affected all other life forms and was completely eradicated by them, the only option left was to incinerate the entire planet's surface. Unfortunately, no cure or containment could be found or produced against the disease. The whole thing may indeed appear to be a contradiction, and obviously it would have been necessary that we should have had our private conversations in this regard as official conversations and made them public. But what I have already explained in relation to this matter should actually make it clear what the facts are. But perhaps it was also unfortunate and confusing of me that I split one and the same factor into 2 parts and spoke of 2 different names of peoples, planets, and galaxies. If this has created an apparent contradiction, then this is regrettable on the one hand, but on the other hand, it was unintentional. So now there is probably a need for me to state the relevant facts openly and in more detail in order to clarify everything. As a further and final explanation, I do not want to go into all the details, but only so far as to make everything a little clearer. After the heavy faith struggles, which were caused by the introduction of Christianity from Earth to the world population of the Gilasser on the planet Cthulhus, in the system Bleira in the galaxy Setkatis. Also a planet was destroyed in such a way that life was no longer possible on it, after which a decree was issued that the Earth in the Sol system was no longer allowed to be approached. Christian delusion was strictly forbidden, but this did not stop fanatics from secretly continuing their Christian faith underground, which then came to the surface again 694 years later and spread again on both planets that were still habitable. This led to the emergence of various religious groups, respectively sects, and from these, new religious struggles that spread to both worlds and wreaked enormous destruction, making the living conditions for the populations of the planets increasingly precarious over the decades. What now needs to be further officially explained is this. Again, after the catastrophe of the First Religious War about 1,000 years ago, the Christian delusion continued to modernize in a secret underground way. And consequently, after 694 years, further religious fights arose, which could no longer be contained for about 300 years and, moreover, spread to both inhabited planets and claimed millions of victims. These battles also caused severe destruction of nature and the atmosphere, and all but a few remnants of animal and plant life were also exterminated. Then it happened that an epidemic broke out on one of the planets, which spread to a worldwide pandemic, spread to the whole world, and finally also to the other planet. According to the terrestrial calendar, it raged for around 3 decades, with 4/5 of all Gilasur, respectively Gilanner as they called themselves, falling victim to the epidemic on both planets. And consequently, when everything had progressed so far that both worlds would soon no longer be habitable, large space-flying apparatus, respectively, large spaceships were built and sent out to various regions of the universe to search for and explore new habitable worlds. One of these space-flying apparatus was built from a meteor, and so it happened that about 1,000 years later, a large Gilasur space-flying apparatus came to Earth again, the one that had been built from a meteor. However, this was brought to Earth due to an error caused by an unfortunate technical error of a coordinate device, and in the end, however, an attempt to repair another damage also resulted in a serious accident. And since they were forbidden to receive help from others to return home, and since we, Plejaren, and our Federation were also not allowed to offer any help according to their homeworlds, and since they also had the order to destroy their large flying apparatus if it was no longer possible to return under their own steam, and since sectarian Christianity was once again taken over by the crew because it was infiltrated by Christian secret allies who had been able to operate secretly in the space apparatus for a long time, those who remained unimpressed by sectarianism followed this order. And that they followed the order to destroy the planet was not least because they were informed that the wars of religion had been finally ended, and that there was a danger that those who had once again come to Earth would once again bring disaster back. This was in the form of the Christian delusion of faith, which was again widespread among the crew of the space-flying apparatus. So it was feared on the homeworlds that Christian sectarianism could be brought back again. The history of the situation and the Tunguska explosion is well known to you. But is that the Gilasur, respectively Gilanner, came to Earth in 1907 with their large space-flying apparatus, converted it into a huge atomic bomb, and then exploded it on the 30th of June 1908 high above the Tunguska region, killing 4,387 human beings. At the time they left, their home was still the planet Catullus in the Blyra system in the Set Catus galaxy, which I also explained at the 365th official contact conversation. However, during the time when the Gilasur were on Earth with their large space-flying apparatus, the crews of another large research space-flying apparatus, and with our help, calculated from the Earth in the so-called Coma Galaxy clusters, found a new system with 3 uninhabited but habitable planets named Barden 1, Barden 2, and Barden 3. The 2 homeworlds in the system Blyra had become so inhospitable and almost uninhabitable as the 3rd planet, which was destroyed to the point of uninhabitability. That the remaining populations of the two only poorly inhabitable planets had to be evacuated and brought to the Bardon planets with powerful emigration space-flying apparatus, respectively. After that, everything was arranged within a few years to carry out the whole thing. The total migration to the three Bardon planets then took 11 years according to earthly time calculation. Since then, the peoples of all three Bardon planets call themselves Bardaner. Accordingly, at the 428th official contact conversation, I named Bardon 1, 2, and 3 as the home worlds of the old Gilisser, respectively Gilliner as Bardon and their peoples as Bardons, to which I also counted those who were stranded on Earth. This is precisely because I also connected those who had lost their way on Earth with the new name of the new worlds, which obviously led to confusion, which was not my intention and is to be described as confusing and a mistake. But since the Gilazer, with their large spaceship in 1907, still came from the system Blira, I also named their home planet Ketulus. The home system Setkatis, the people Galana respectively Galasser, and according to their origin also the human beings of the large space-flying apparatus in this way. Then I named the new home Bardan in the Coma cluster of galaxies, because those who were stranded on Earth belonged to the same people. Obviously, I should not have done that, even though those who strayed to Earth actually belonged to the Bardon people, who, according to earthly time, had finished their emigration to Bardon in 1926. However, in a private conversation with you, I obviously did not mention the whole thing extensively enough.
The whole thing is actually a little confusing at first sight, at least for the first impression. But after your explanation, everything seems understandable to me when I look at it logically. I can remember that you mentioned some things once. But one more question regarding the abandoned and now hostile planets in the Blira system of the Setkatis galaxy. Can they once again bear life? Then regarding mistakes, I would like to say that no human being is free from making mistakes. And on the other hand, this also proves that you Playaran are only human beings, and not superhumans or the like, and therefore not perfect. And he who believes himself to be free from error casts the first stone, so it has been said since ancient times.
What you say hits the nail on the head, as you sometimes like to say. But regarding the two planets in the Blira system, both of them, as well as the third, which was destroyed to the point of hostility to life, were eliminated by the Helas 6 years after the end of emigration, because they had also become a danger for the Blira system and would have affected its order, because they were maliciously pushed out of their orbits during the war.
Then I hope everything is finally clear and does not lead to further questions. What is regrettable is that in all contact reports and in various books there are still mistakes or apparent misunderstandings, as there are also with the millions, billions, trillions, and quadrillions of data that need to be corrected. As you know, as I have told you, the symbolic signs in the Nocademian memory banks are for millions. Billions, trillions, and quadrillions unfortunately so deceptively similar to each other that I always get confused when retrieving data. As a result, I made millions into billions and billions into trillions, unfortunately. But another question. The events of Tunguska were actually caused by the Gilliner, respectively Gilisser, or just by the Bardons, namely by a large spaceship which they made from a meteor which they took advantage of. So far, those Earthlings are right who attribute the gigantic explosion to a meteor, but it is also assumed that it could have been an asteroid. However, they do not want to admit that it was a meteor converted into a spaceship, and that the explosion was an atomic bomb. But speaking of this meteor, do you know when the last really big meteor hit Earth? As far as I know, the last really big event was about 50,000 years ago when the Canyon Diablo meteor thundered down. You can find the following on the internet.
Canyon Diablo meteorite. Switch to navigation. Search Canyon Diablo. The meteorite Canyon Diablo was found in the vicinity of the famous Barringer crater in Arizona.
The impact event took place about 50,000 years ago, so the crater has a relatively low geological age. The crater has a diameter of 1.186 kilometers and is 170 meters deep. The associated meteorite had an estimated diameter of 25 to 30 meters, a mass of 150,000 to 5 million tons, and has impacted at a speed of 15 to 20 kilometers per s. Of the total original mass of the meteorite, only 30 tons have been found so far. The meteorite comes from the asteroid belt and is classified as a coarse octahedron of Group Ia, uranium-lead. Dating at Canyon Diablo was first used in the 1950s by Claire Cameron Patterson and Fritz G. Houtemans to determine the age of the Earth at 4.55 billion 500 million years. Chemical composition: 91.6% iron, 7.1% nickel, 1% carbon, 1% sulfur, 0.26% phosphorus, 80 ppm gallium, 320 ppm germanium, 1.9 ppm iridium. Henri Moisson discovered the moissonite named after him in this meteorite in 1893.
This was the last really large meteorite known to Earth humans. But from today on, 1,476 years ago, in the year 536, there was an even bigger object, and this could have been dangerous for the Earth if it had not exploded at a height of 21,000 meters. It was an object 541 meters in diameter, and the explosion created a huge cloud of dust around large areas of the Earth.
I have never heard or read about that. But if you say so, then it must have been. Something similar has not happened since then?
It has not in the way mentioned. Small projectiles from space have since then, of course, uncountable ones exploded at great heights above the Earth, while others have fallen to the Earth.
You are also talking about atmospheric or asteroidal shooting. That is, the sound of explosions can be heard very often, especially at night when it is very quiet, but usually only outside villages and cities where the noise drowned everything out, including the explosions of space projectiles falling into the Earth's atmosphere. We have discussed this on various occasions during our official and unofficial contact conversations, which have lasted for almost 40 years.
That is correct. That is what I was talking about, even if I did not mention what you say directly. But I am used to the fact that you always understand what I am not saying directly behind what I say. This is a special ability that is unique to you, which is why I can often limit myself to the essentials in our conversations, and do not have to go into detail.
Which unfortunately also has disadvantages, not for me, but for the human beings who then read the contact reports, because they usually do not understand what you are not saying, and therefore cannot understand it, which is why there are also apparent misunderstandings.
Unfortunately, they lack the necessary possibility to understand the whole thing in a logical way.
Yes, but logic is a thing in itself, which is also connected with reality and its truth, because something can only be logical if it corresponds to reality and its truth. But to recognize reality and its truth is difficult for the human beings, because first they have to learn mindfulness and attention, because only through this it is possible for them to recognize also reality as such and the whole in its actuality.
That is correct.
But there is something else. It seems that the Earthlings do not know what you Playaran mean by higher life. Can you explain something about that, please?
It is the same as what you also understand by higher life.
But they want to know from you, respectively from you, Playaran.
Then so be it. By higher life, we mean all life forms that have a conscious awareness or an instinctive awareness, and therefore also a psyche life and a perception of pain.
Is that all?
That is a comprehensive explanation.
Short and sweet, you cannot get any shorter than that. Congratulations, it did not occur to me even in this form. So once again you can see the difference between old and older, or between little worms and worms.
You like to joke.
I do not, because where there is more light, it is even brighter.
And your light is not under a bushel either.
This is an issue I do not want to go into. But listen to my next question, which concerns Hartmut, so I asked Florina to tell you everything so that you can consult with Quetzal. As you know, Hartmut is a longtime passive member and he wants to work for the core group membership. He has been with us since November-December last year, that is to say for 7-8 months, and since then he has been working with full commitment every day without remuneration. Figu cannot pay a salary and is also not an official employer for him. He simply enjoys board and lodging with us, but is also registered in our community and insured against accident and liability. He is also looking for a job, but this is a bit of a hassle, as he first has to find a job that will guarantee long-term employment. Now that he wants to give up his wandering life, which he has been living in various countries around the world, and settle down, preferably in the SS Center. The question arises as to the 2-year period that has to be completed, with work assignments and getting to know the Figu members and all the trimmings of being able to make a core group application. Hartmut has been coming for several days or weeks on several occasions for years and has worked here in the center and done a lot of work. But now, this time, it is 7 or 8 months, so we Figu members, at least some of us who have talked to Hartmut about it, think that the 2-year period is now very much and even more than required in terms of outreach, getting to know each other, etc., so that he can apply for membership. The only remaining problem would be that he has not yet found a permanent job, so I thought that you and Quetzal should decide what to do. For my part, I thought that it would be justified to allow him core group membership according to the facts as they stood, but to give him until the end of December 2013 to find a suitable, worthy, and permanent job. We have the rule that each core group member must have a permanent job. So I ask you what you and Quetzal thought about this.
Florina has given me a detailed account of your request, and I have consulted Quetzal, who has told me that we have decided, in relation to your statements to Florina, that there is nothing to prevent Hartmut from becoming a member of Figu, since he has more than fulfilled the conditions for membership. Quetzal has also arranged for the 2 of us and our panel, which is dealing with your affairs as you know, to deal with the whole matter of Hartmut, with a unanimous vote in favor of membership. It was also made clear that a membership could also be granted if Hartmut could not yet prove a permanent job, because his constant commitment to the center alone justifies this. As I have noticed myself, he is very hard-working and also very employable, as you sometimes say, so there is no reason to fear any failure on his part. In this exceptional case, membership is also to be recommended even without a permanent job at present. Although Hartmut still has to be informed in detail by Bernadette about the tasks, duties, and obligations in an appropriate conversation.
Clear case. Many thanks for your clarifying and advising efforts.
Time has not stood still during our conversation, dear friend.
I see, but there are 2 or 3 questions left, which we should discuss privately.
If you must, then please do so.